All right.
Greetings, everyone. How's it going? My name is Derwin Demonch, and this is your co-host on Synonyms of Sound.
And this is Tony Boyle, your second co host. And I would like to introduce our guest today, Antonia Dean, investor, marketing leader, entrepreneur, mom, all the accolades. How are you doing today, Antonia?
I'm feeling great. Happy to be here.
Excellent, excellent. All right, thank you so much for being on the show. I know this is a hot topic in the industry right now, and you may be able to give us some perspective on this. But there's this company called Builder AI, which essentially was a unicorn company, got millions of dollars from companies like Microsoft and a couple other companies. Essentially, was valued at 1.3 billion. And doing some research, they eventually found out it was completely a fraud. They essentially had 700 engineers in India building these platforms that was supposed to be AI driven. So I guess my question to you is, as people just throw do people just throw money at the wall and don't investigate when they're investing in these companies? Like, how can something like this happen?
So I didn't invest in that company, so I don't know exactly,
Okay,
what their
good thing.
promise was or exactly what happened there. But in general, how could a company that was previously valued at $1 billion fail? A number of ways. I will say that there when there is a nascent technology that has the potential to be revolutionary, there are
Mm-hmm.
some folks that would rather be first and wrong than left
Mm,
behind. So some folks will jump in and invest behind it because they would rather be first. And if it wins, then they win big. And if it doesn't, quite honestly, part of your job as a VC is to understand that the companies will fail. If it
mm-hmm.
was, if you could have 100% success rate, they wouldn't need us to be able to pick the good from the great,
Mm,
from the exceptional. So companies fail all the time. I don't know exactly what happened there, but I will say whenever there's a new technology, there are folks that are, just would rather be first than potentially miss out on a big win and are willing to take that risk. So hopefully the investors in that company mitigated that risk across their portfolio, and I'm hopeful that it wasn't out and out fraud, because sometimes you can have a great idea and a great product, and if certain things don't come together at just the right time, the company still might not make it.
got it. Okay. And then a follow up to that, I do feel like in the VC world, anything that has AI on it is automatically like hot cakes, hot lava. You got to be on it. Like, is that true, or is that just speculation from what other people that aren't in your space are just assume is the case?
I will say two things. I will say it was true. There was a moment when, ChatGPT took the world by storm, and a few folks started to realize truly the power of generative AI. And there were a lot of investors that, again,
Mm-hmm.
were ready to cut the check first rather than be missed. That moment has cooled off. Those hype cycles typically don't last very long. And so where we are with AI is, I put it this way, and I just gave this as a talk last week at the University of Pennsylvania here in Philadelphia. Building a software or tech company now without AI is going to sound like an accountant refusing to use Excel or Google Sheets,
Oh wow.
or a
Okay.
retailer saying, well, we're going to have a store, but we're not going to have a website and we're not going to sell online. AI is truly just going to become, and is becoming more and more every day, an enabling technology. A thing
Mm,
that in the past, where as a business, perhaps you didn't have someone on your team who could do that research or who could think about this one problem. Now that is going to become, those kinds of questions are going to be posed to the AI, posed to publicly facing AIs, and companies are increasingly going to start building their own language model and their own AI agents to just extend the capacity of what the human beings on the team are able to do.
all right. Awesome. Awesome. Awesome.
I'm curious, what excites you the most or scares you the most about the pace of AI development right now?
Yeah, I will say what excites me the most, to be quite honest, is if we look at AI and what it opens up. There's a world where if you wanted to start a software company, maybe you would, okay, all right, I gotta leave my job and go do 2 years at, a super exclusive business school. I got to go to Stanford Graduate School of Business and get my
Mm-hmm.
MBA, and hope while I'm out there that I meet the right investors and I meet the right engineers and someone who can help me start this software company. Now you can say, I want to start a software company. you can use AI to do the coding and the programming for you, and you can have a prototype in a few minutes, less than a day. So you could go from idea to having a company really, really quickly. And I think that's going to be game changing and revolutionary for folks who are typically excluded from the conversation. So from people who don't have a college roommate who was a programmer, from folks who didn't go to college, for people who can't afford to hire a CTO or an outsourced engineer. So you'll see people be able to be solo founders in a way that they weren't before. And they'll be able to get farther on their own without having to raise as much money for a big engineering team, and then see if the customer wants the product. You'll be able to launch the product, be in the market, and then say, okay, we're really on to something now, let's scale out our team. So that's one of the things that really excites me about AI. I will say one of the things that scares me a little bit is I use AI in my work, and AI hallucinates. There are times when I'll be like, oh, I really like that answer. And that's like the technical term that folks
Uh-huh.
who are builders and engineers in the space will use. Oh, I really like that. Where'd you get that? Oh, and I'll get a response, sorry, we made that up, or sorry, that was incorrect. So I guess my
Mm,
biggest fear with AI is that people will outsource their thinking. Like AI can outsource the doing, but it shouldn't outsource your thinking. Like you should still be thinking critically about whatever problem it is that you're trying to solve, or whatever thing you're trying to get the answer to, and let AI just be kind of the foundational layer that gets you started, but not the thing that does all of your thinking for you.
gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. Okay. So during your time at Comcast and now your time at Black Ops VC, you've pushed for more inclusive investment. What does true equity look like in the startup ecosystem, and how far away are we from it?
Okay, so true equity looks like, for me, not just an equal opportunity to succeed, but the equal chance to fail. And even more than
Mm-hmm.
that, the equal chance to just be mediocre. There are folks that get to be very, very average at what they do and still get to be successful, still get to
Mm,
companies, still get to raise money for those companies, still get to have teams and hire folks, get to own their own homes, get to make sure their children go to safe schools. And to me, equal opportunity in the startup system looks like, when folks want to use starting a company as their path to that life, they have
mm-hmm.
the same chance. They're judged on not just what they've done, but their potential, because we're all in the business of guessing what the future looks like. Our entrepreneurs are building it, and our investors are betting on it. And so if someone has a good idea, they have the drive, the determination, they should have the equal chance to see that idea through. So that's what equity looks like. How far are we from it? I hesitate to give an answer because as human beings, we're not really that good at estimating how long something will take. We tend to both under and overestimate. So we think
Mm-hmm.
things will be faster, and then we also think certain things will never happen. So there are already things in my lifetime that, we didn't think would happen that have happened. And so I will say, to be fair, frank, and honest, that we're in a moment of contraction right now. We're in a moment of many folks who discovered how unjust certain systems were in the last 5 years have kind of already given up on that hard work, because it
Mm-hmm.
is long, hard work.
Mm-hmm.
But then we're starting to make such progress. When I first started in VC, there were approximately about like 300 Black founders who had been able to raise, VC money. We could still count the number of Black founders that had raised over $1 million. At last look, we're at about 1,000 Black founders that have raised VC money, far more that have raised over 1 million. So in the last like 5, 6 years, those numbers have tripled. Are they small? Absolutely. Are they systematically small in a way that like nowhere in nature would you be able to replicate this without some kind of interference of bias? Again, absolutely. But it's also bigger now than it's ever been and continuing to grow. So I hesitate to put a number on it, because I think whatever I guess is probably going to be too long, and it'll probably happen faster than that.
Wow. I mean, didn't know the numbers were so not great, but there's been a lot of improvement, which is fantastic. Um, so you've advised founders through early growth. What's the common blind spot you see among first-time Black or brown entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so I will say there are two things, and I think they have the same root cause. And so I'll start with the cause, and then I'll give the answer. what I see among Black founders, founders of color, women founders, is that often the skills that got us in the position to be able to have the insight, the network, the expertise to
Mm-hmm.
start the company may not always be the skills that get us to the next phase. And so, one way this shows up is, you know, this feeling of having to be twice as good to get half as far. And so I'll talk to
Mm.
founders that will say things like, "Oh, you know, I can't create a product for this user base if I haven't experienced it. So I went out and I got that job and I did that job so I could experience it."
Mm.
And I think that's a noble, I think the impetus and the mindset behind that is a good one. But
Mm-hmm.
practically, that means you can't grow but so fast if everything you're trying to do, you want to first be able to experience. So there is this mindset shift that has to happen to say that I don't necessarily have to have the firsthand expertise to be the person that can build this company. Maybe I need to hire that person. Maybe I need to bring that person on as an advisor or a consultant, or, you know, be an outsourced vendor to my company. And I still keep my fingers as close to the pulse, but realizing we only have 24 hours in a day, there's only so much you'll be able to do. So at some point you have to, you know, take the leap and trust that, you know, the safety net will appear and that you can do things without having all of the answers from step one, that you will get the answers as you need them.
Makes sense.
I'm curious if, with what you've seen so far in your space, are there any like safeguards you personally believe are like non-negotiable for backing an AI company with powerful capabilities? Like, are you kind of assessing the ethical alignment that an AI founder might have in terms of like a governance framework or a long-term safety plan with what they're building essentially?
Yeah, so I will say, because I'm a seed stage investor, I'm very clear that the company that I invest in is not likely to be the company that ultimately gets acquired or goes public. There's going to be iterations and pivots and changes. So things like the core customer, the core promise, all of those things may shift. And so what I like to do is make sure that I have a high level of confidence in the founder that I'm backing. Is this someone who knows what they're doing? Is this someone who's a high integrity? Because you can have contracts and agreements all you want, but at the end of the day, it's still a piece of paper and it's only as good as the person on the other side. I mean, we can point to very famous examples of people that enter into contracts every day with no intention to actually pay the person for the work that they've done. So I like to spend time up front making sure that I'm talking to a founder, that I'm understanding their worldview, that I'm understanding why they set out to start the company. In my world, none of my founders are coming because they just said, "Oh, okay, I think I can hit a lick over here, so I just want to make some money real quick." Like, no, you're setting out to do something incredibly hard. You have to have something more going for you than that. And so because of that, I trust that my founders will be able to behave with high integrity when those problems arise. When they say, "Hey, I aim to serve this customer base and I'm not going to screw those folks over," or "I'm going to make sure that what we do is always in service to them." Because I can lay out in documents now, "Hey, tell me you'll never do X, Y, and Z." And in 3 years, the AI will have capabilities that none of us even could have imagined. So for me, it's important to make sure that I'm investing in high integrity, high character people, because that is more of a fail safe than coming up with specifics of, "Yes, I want you to do this. No, I don't want you to do that," because all of those things could be obsolete tomorrow.
Gotcha.
Do you think
Gotcha.
that well, how do you feel about the potential for pretty significant job displacement with the advancements in AI?
I think that's probably going to happen. Exactly what that looks like, I'm not sure. I will say, as someone who uses a lot, I don't think the models are there quite yet. I will say, if you use it regularly, you will see, like, okay, that wasn't that good. Like, it was better than nothing, but it wasn't amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I do think it is really going to have a shift in the workplace, and I think that many folks who consider themselves not to be working in technology, or that doesn't have anything to do with me, are going to find that an important skill set is going to be knowing how to write prompts, knowing how to use AI, knowing how to manage AI agents, knowing how to extend their own productivity with AI the same way 20 years ago, it was about knowing how to search well on Google and knowing how to use the internet. I think it's going to be a similar kind of skill set, but ultimately what happens in the workforce, I don't think anyone actually knows. AI is going to change a whole lot of things, but exactly what that looks like, I don't think anyone actually knows.
Gotcha. Something you had said earlier when it came to like the blind spots, you mentioned sometimes leaders wanting to be in the space or environment and have the firsthand experience. I feel that's very similar to women sometimes when they're applying for jobs. If they don't check all the boxes, they don't feel like they want to apply, versus where male counterparts, we could only have 10%, we're going to apply anyway. So that was kind of interesting when you said that, and it kind of, brought me back to that for some reason.
Yeah,
But what are your thoughts on that? Do
I
you
think you're
think
exactly right. And I think it's because the more you've been counted out or excluded or marginalized or whatever word we want to sideline, whatever word we want to use, then historically the answer to that has been, okay, well, I just have to be so good they can't tell me no. Oh, they say I've never had this experience before, so I have to go get that experience. Um, so I think that's really what's driving a lot of that, and so I won't dismiss it in any way because it is true and it is people's real life experience. But I do think to build a venture scale company, so a company that gets to 100 million in revenue in about a decade, give or take a few years on either side, a company that's able to go public, to get $1 billion valuation, to be acquired for a significant amount, you have to be thinking about how you get there quickly. The pace at which you build is really key in venture. And so there is a world where there's some experiences you can go and get really, really quickly. If you're building something for, K through 12 public education and you have not set foot in a public school classroom since you graduated high school, you probably should go do that. But you may not necessarily need to go back to school and get a degree in early childhood education. There
makes
can be ways
sense?
in between. You may say, hey, Principal so and so, would you mind if I shadowed one of your teachers for a week so I can just get a little bit more real world experience? So it's figuring out what that happy medium is that allows you to keep building at a rapid pace, but then also to still have that experience, so that people don't discount you.
Makes complete sense. So I guess this kind of goes really well with my next question because you mentioned scale. So you've worked inside massive corporation, grassroots ecosystems. What can the corporate world learn from startup culture and vice versa?
Oh, this is a great question, and I've gone back and forth many times between very, very large, and very, very small. I've worked at companies that have over 100,000 employees. I've worked at companies that have had 4 employees and many, many different spaces in between. I think that things corporates can learn from startups is you don't have to know all the answers. You can iterate, you can test things. There's often oh, okay, that's an interesting idea. Go prove to me that you're right. Go research this. Go ask these other people for their opinion. Go get all of these other things to prove to me that you're right. And there are times in my career where I spent a year trying to prove that I was right. Oh, that's a great idea for North America. Go fly to Korea and see if it's a great idea in Korea. And startups, because they just simply don't have the resources to do that, have to be a lot more thoughtful about how they test an idea. Is this a really good idea? Maybe we want a really quick A/B test. Maybe instead of spending $10,000 on a flight to Hong Kong, we spend $1,000 and spin up a really quick website and put some Facebook money behind it and just see what people are interested in, and move quickly and iterate in that way. And so I think corporations could learn a bit of that, of, just being willing to try something and not know the answers and get kind of that external feedback. And then in terms of what startups can learn, from corporations, is I think there is a level of rigor that can come through. Often startups, when I first started in this industry, it was go fast and break things. Like, done is better than perfect. Just get the thing out there, get the thing out there. And I think, Dervin, to your earlier questions about the fears around AI, is we've seen what that can offer the world when you launch something and you haven't been fully thoughtful about it and you haven't consulted and haven't thought who's getting left out, who might be harmed here. And so I think that as startups aim to go quickly, they should, create the space, create the time to be able to say, wait, can we pause here? Where could we add a little bit more rigor? Where could we
Mm-hmm.
see if we could serve a broader customer base? Where do we see who might be harmed or excluded by the way that we're building the product now? And is there a way to build that in at the outfront? Sometimes there's not. Sometimes you don't have the time or the money to do everything, but even thinking about it can then help you put it on a roadmap for the future.
What are your thoughts on open source development with AI versus closed source? And do you think they can coexist, or do you think one has to overtake the other?
I'll say I don't think I'm the best person to answer that question because I'm not actually building an AI. So on that one, I will say I'm just not the best person to give that perspective.
I guess let me reframe it. From an investment standpoint, would an open source project be more lucrative or a closed source project?
Well, it really depends on the company. I'm looking at companies right now that are gung ho about open source AI. I have companies that are saying, like, you know what, we're building our own. If for me, it always comes down to what makes the most sense for your industry, what is the product you're trying to build, how quickly, how urgent is the need, and what puts you in the best position. I will say, as a founder thinking about and debating that question, for me, I don't expect people to have one hard and fast answer, but I want to know what your strategy would be and say this would work so long as these conditions remain the same, and if this thing
Mm-hmm.
changes, we would choose this alternative. Or yeah, you know what, our goal is to be closed source, but right now to get going we started on open source, and once we get to this point we're going to be able to bring this in house and train our own models. So for me as an investor, it's really about understanding what best serves the space, the industry, the customer target, the product that they're building, and understanding what the founder's mindset and strategy would be, to continue to operate the company, and how they're insulating or future proofing themselves against potential changes in the external markets.
Hmm.
So, more about where you are today. What drew you to Operator Ventures, and how does that align with your personal values?
Yeah, so I will say that I've been in VC now for about 8 years, been in tech for 10, and been in beauty before. And frequently, I was the only Black woman who was not someone's secretary in anywhere that I worked. And I don't even just mean like my team, I mean like the floor, like these few floors. And so that often meant I had to be the unpaid voice of the voiceless, and to say, hey, we're leaving folks out here, or hey, this doesn't actually serve everyone, and here's a group of founders, or here are a group of people that would be excluded unintentionally. And so what really drew me to Black Ops is I had been doing this work all along, and now was the opportunity to actually formally do it and to make this, um, what my full-time job was. I'd previously been enrolled, where, as you mentioned, I was doing, some ecosystem development, some direct investing, some LP investing, and this was the opportunity to do more of the direct investing, and also to be able to do it without always having to make the case for, hey, maybe we should look at someone besides, a 6'2" white guy who graduated from Stanford, Harvard, or MIT. Like, there were often times I had to really advocate and make the case for why that's not the only profile of person that can be talented. And it's been really great to be on a team that just understands that innately. And now it's not about the what we do, it's
Mm-hmm.
about how we get there and how we achieve it and make it happen.
All right. So, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about Black founders in the VC world that you wish more people understood?
I think that it's not necessarily that there are overt biases, or people saying, oh, Black founders can't do this. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is understanding what life looks like for other people and how talent shows up. So often what will happen is, if one person wants to start a company, they may be in a position where, okay, they can, hey, the guy who lived across the hall from me in the dorm was a computer science major, He'll be my co-founder. Hey, we need a couple 100,000 to get going. We'll raise a friends and family round, and we will, ask our parents and our neighbors and our extended family, and we'll be able to get the money going. And, it's a really big idea. We love it. So we're going to drop out of school or quit our first jobs and go full time on this. And that's just not everyone's life experience to be able to start a company in
Mm-hmm.
that way. So some of the things that become that can be not just misconceptions about Black founders, but misconceptions about talent that can negatively impact Black founders will be, sometimes you'll hear investors say, oh, I don't invest in a solo founder. You have to have a co-founder. You have to have a technical co-founder. Well, once again, if you don't come from an environment where you're exposed to a lot of people with technical skills, you may not have someone you trust well enough to be like, let's be all in and build a company together. You'll hear folks say, oh, well, you know what, raise your friends and family around and then come back to us. If your friends and family cannot front you hundreds of thousands of dollars, you may need to start raising money early. Or you may need to keep working at your job. I've heard investors say, oh, well, this person still has a full-time job. They must not be serious. And to me, I say, well, they must have bills. If they can't cover their bills, cover their living expenses, and build this company, people are going to default towards survival. So I think it's just understanding what life experience looks like for other people to help investors see that a talented founder with a great idea can come in any number of packages, and it doesn't just have to be an Ivy League dropout in a hoodie on a skateboard is the next big thing. And I will say, thankfully, as the VC world has diversified and there are more women, there are more people of color, there are more Black folks running funds and writing checks, we're starting to see that aperture widen of what a successful founder looks like.
I'm so happy that you mentioned about paying bills because that's the reality. Not everyone has the funds to just dive into something and not worry about how am I going to keep myself somewhat financially secure and pay my everyday bills. So I'm so happy that you kind of provided that gem. It doesn't mean that you're not fully locked in or fully committed. You just got bills and you got life, you have a family or whatever. It may not even have a family, but you still need to live.
Yes,
So I appreciate that you said that for sure.
absolutely. You still got to live.
So, how much of the game would you say is like storytelling? Like when you're pitching LPs or hearing founders, how much of it is real traction versus good narrative?
I will say real traction depends on your stage, but good narrative is a must have every single time, every stage, every conversation, everyone that you're talking to. When you are raising in VC, these are private capital markets. So I can't just go type into Google and see how much is this company worth. So if I'm interested in a company, it's about, okay, what narrative have they told me that I can sink my teeth into and believe in? And what narrative will other investors be able to believe in? Hey, I think this company is really interesting. You should take a look at it. Here's the valuation that they're going for. And we kind of all sense check against ourselves based on what other companies have raised, based on what other folks are seeing. So I will say it's not all good narrative. There are those snake oil salesmen that will just want to tell you a really nice story and then try to figure out how to do it afterwards. But I do think that you can overcorrect and focus just on having the best product or the best branding or the best team. And if you don't spend that time being able to tell a story that your customers can understand and get excited about, that investors can understand and get excited about, that potential employees can understand and get excited about, because you have to build a team around this. And often you're going to want people who, like we just said, have bills, and you're going to want them to leave their big jobs and come believe in you. So it's not, a narrative is not everything, but it has to be part of everything that you do.
When you're meeting a founder, how fast do you feel it? Like can you tell in like the first 5 minutes if it's a hell yes or a absolutely not?
Generally speaking, I can.
Mhm.
I can tell if it's an absolutely not. Again, like I have a specific thesis, so it's really easy for me to know if you meet that thesis. But assuming
Yep.
you pass that bar, one of the things that I do, and I'll just free game right here, I start all my calls by saying, hey, don't plan to screen share. I've already read your slides. Tell me the story of your company. And I can tell based on how tightly you tell me that story, how much you're able to tell me why you're building this company, if the company is interesting enough and you've been able to frame it interestingly enough to continue to get investors interested and excited about it. That's kind of like what I'm thinking first.
Makes sense. Nice.
All right. So now everyone knows game. Next time they speak with you, they know exactly what to do. No slides. Come ready with your 5 minute,
I'm
10 minute
ready.
pitch.
And that's
I love
everybody,
it.
whether you speak to me or not. Yes, know your slides, know your elevator pitch, but you should be prepared to sit and have a 20 to 30-minute conversation with anyone about your company. If you can't do that, if you have a script you need to stick to, you're not ready yet. You should be prepared to have a conversation with anyone about your company, and none of your answers should take longer than 3 to 5 minutes. If you've been speaking for 10 minutes, you've been talking too long because now it's not a conversation anymore.
Okay, okay. So, as a black woman navigating both the public and private sectors, how has your leadership style evolved and what does power mean to you now?
Oh, that's a really good question. Um, how's my leadership style evolved? I will say that I'm a lot more direct now than I used to be earlier in my career. Part of that being because I have more of the professional experience. I'm coming in with a little bit more authority and able to just say, hey, here's what this thing is. But it's also because early in my career, like I said, I was often the only black woman operating in a like professional functional capacity. And many black women in the workplace will tell you there's a double bind for us. If you're not nice all the time, they consider it, oh, she's aggressive. Oh, she has an attitude. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite sure if she's a culture fit. So I see
Mm-hmm.
this a lot. I see it in myself. I see it in a lot of black women I interact with of just being overly professional, always courteous, always kind. Um, because there's the fear that if I'm anything less than, will that be perceived as something more serious than what it was? I started my career in the beauty industry, and I'll share a quick story. I was working on a brand. We were working with our PR agency. They were asking me a question. I was sitting right next to my manager at the time, and my manager was like, oh my gosh, she's so annoying. Just write her back and just say the answer is no. And so I was like, okay, you're telling me this. So I wrote back, I said, the answer is no. And the woman from the PR agency called my manager while we were both still sitting there. And I was like, is everything okay with Antonia? Her email was really aggressive. I'm not sure if I made her mad. And I'm like, wow, those weren't even my words. You're taking what this other woman said. I literally
Wow.
said it verbatim,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm the one being painted as having the attitude problem. And so how my
Yep.
leadership style has evolved is I'm better at understanding that a lot of that is your issue and that I can't own that. But at the same time, like I know this is probably what I'm coming into the room with. And so to get to your last question of like what does power look like? For me, power looks like the ability to be able to just be directive, like this is what we're doing. And that's what we do. Not having to, lead by committee, not having to, anyone who spent a good amount of time in corporate knows that sometimes you got to breadcrumb your idea enough so that other people think it's their idea
Mm-hmm.
and so that they
Mm-hmm.
can say it in the meeting and then you can chime in and you know that you've been Pinocchio this whole time, like,
Yeah.
or Geppetto
Uh-huh.
this whole time with the puppets, but because you can't just come out and say the thing. So what power looks like for me now is just being able to be directive, like the answer is no.
I'm curious, has there ever been a time where you felt torn between backing something that's really exciting versus something that just might make money?
Oh, all
Like,
the time.
did you ever wrestle with that?
Um, I wrestle with it not so much because it's just I will say earlier when I first started investing, yes, but I think part of what makes you a good VC investor is not just being able to tell good from great, but really being able to tell this is a good company, this is a great company, and this is an exceptional company. And I walk away from and have to say no to companies all the time where I'm like, you've got a great idea, you're going to make money, but this is something that I can't invest in. Sometimes it's you're going to make money, but you're not going to make enough money. And like, there was a company I looked at, really sharp founding team, really believe in the product and the problem they're trying to solve. And we modeled it out. And we're like, we don't see this being bigger than $25 million a year. That's a big company. That is a very, very big company. But for our fund model, it doesn't fit the projections of the kinds of returns that we're looking at. There are companies that operate in spaces that I just can't invest in. And I'm like, you got a really, really good company here that is going to be worth a whole lot of money. But for, based on who your LP base is, if you have banks as limited partners in your fund, there are certain things you won't be able to invest in because they have, rules about where their money is able to be. So yeah, that happens all the time. It gets easier because it happens more frequently, but I won't say it gets better because I can still name, I won't, but I can still name the companies where I'm like, I wish I had done that. I wish I had done that. If it had been my just personal money, $1 million coming from my checking account, I would have done it, and I probably would be retired in Bali by now.
Um, that was a really good question, Dervin, because it just sparked something in my head, and this may be the wrong platform to say it, but isn't investing a little bit like gambling? It's almost like throwing the dice, or is it not?
Um, well, it's not, because a good investor is not just lucky. So it
Oh,
is
okay.
gambling in the sense of you are making a bet and there is a risk of failure, but it's not gambling in that it's not a game of chance and it shouldn't just be about luck. Good investors are actually like actively mitigating the risk and stacking the deck in their favor. And a lot of times you can see that as evidenced by a person's thesis of what they choose to invest in. If someone is just investing in any and everything, they're gambling because they're just
Yep.
waiting for something to show up. But when someone has a pretty narrow thesis and says, I invest in these kinds of companies in this industry, solving these kinds of problems, that's one way they're stacking the deck because they're saying, I understand this well enough to pick the good ones in this space.
Mm. I guess a follow-up question. So for young entrepreneurs or founders who are going to different VCs that have like a mixed bag portfolio versus very narrow and focused, is that a red flag based on what you kind of just said, or not really?
Not necessarily. I think for any entrepreneur or founder, you want to understand what an investor's thesis is. And there will be times when, let's say like me as a Black woman, let's say I'm raising money for a company. There may be times when I'm going to pitch a VC they're not focused on industry, but they're focused on investing in women. And I'm like, okay, this is probably someone who's going to help me in my personal development, right? They're
That makes
probably going to
sense. That
help
makes
coach me
sense.
as an entrepreneur. You may want someone who knows your industry really well because they may be able to help you get customers better. You may want someone who just has a really big name in tech because they can get you the best talent and they can get you the best kinds of engineers or, business development people. So the ideal cap table for a founder has different kinds of investors that serve different purposes. But someone who is maybe industry agnostic is not necessarily a red flag if their thesis is driven by something else that makes sense, like the founder background, like geography. Some folks will say, I invest all along the Gulf Coast, and I know everything that it takes to successfully build a company here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense. Um, Go, Dervin. It seemed like you got a question.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, is there something from founders you'd wish they'd ask more when they connect with you or pitch you?
Yeah, I wish founders asked more about what I end up telling them, but I wish more founders asked about what kind of support they can expect to receive from
Yeah.
me and from every investor. Because to that answer I just gave, you want to stack your cap table with people who are going to be your all-star team and helping you build this company. Like, you can't have a team full of LeBrons. You can't have a team full of Steph Currys. You have to balance those folks out with
You may be
people.
wrong there. People who believe that you can have a team full of LeBrons. I'm sorry.
Well, God ain't
It was a
making
good
that many
example.
LeBrons. God ain't making that many. So far, he's made two. So like, so you want to balance it. And so I wish I tell founders all the time that all money isn't good money. You want to make sure that the people you are giving part of your company to, because that's what the investor is doing. They're taking a percentage of your company. Oftentimes, they're taking a seat on your board. They will have a say in what happens with your company. There are founders that get pushed out of their companies by the investors on the board, people they brought in. So you want to understand what role these folks expect to play. Is this someone who's just going to write you a check and they don't really want to hear from you and they're not really going to be paying attention? that's cool, but you can't have only that because there's times you're going to need help. So you want to make sure you have a balance between people who are going to be strategic, people who are going to be personally supportive of you, people who are just going to offer the capital and let you run, people who will sit with you for an hour and help you map out your sales plan or map out your customer journey. So I wish more founders asked about that because it shows me, an investor, that you're being really thoughtful about who you're bringing to the table to help you build and grow this company.
Absolutely. I like that answer. Good to hear.
I love it. The LeBron thing was I'm not sure about, but everything else was on point. I gotta ask, who's the second LeBron? You said there were two, so now that piqued my
LeBron James
interest.
Jr. I was
His
being
son,
literal.
bro.
Bronny. I was being literal. God made two LeBron James, the first and the second.
Okay, that went over my head for a little bit. Um, so what are some emerging trends or sectors where you see untapped potential for Black entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so I think about when I'm looking at a company, I think about why is this founder the right person to solve this problem? And so we have a phrase in the industry of like approximate founder, meaning you've been close to the problem that you've experienced. And so I think about where are the areas where, Black founders have an unfair advantage to win because they're up close and they understand that problem more. And that can be things that we experience more. So if you think about some of the things that have gotten me really excited in my career, I've done 2 fintech deals in my career, started by Black male founders who were starting companies that only they could start because they had this kind of experience. And so there are so many folks that are unbanked or underbanked. 61% of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency. And to be honest, the way the economy is going, I expect that number to increase. So I think that anytime you're up close with an experience, if you have a software brain, to turn that on to say, how can this thing be better? Who's not being served? And how could we better serve this customer base? So I think areas like fintech are really ripe for disruption, and I see Black founders building really, really interesting companies there. I think things in healthcare and like patient experience are really, really ripe for Black founders. I've started to see an emergence of Black founders who are building civic tech companies that can help with, interactions with local government, be that police, but also may that be your city council person, your building inspector, some of these interactions that other folks may not have because their money insulates them from that. And the last one where I personally am making an appeal for more Black founders to get involved is climate. Because although we have, this vision of folks who are eco-friendly, not looking like us, the reality is that we bear the brunt of climate change more than anyone else. It is our communities that are often the least prepared. In any given metropolitan area, it will be the Black neighborhoods that are dealing with issues of environmental justice, that will have the worst water quality, the worst air quality because of, where things like highways or landfills or, industrial areas are put and who lives close to them. So for me, it's climate, and I really would love to see more Black and brown folks get really, really engaged in climate and the way the impacts of climate change and environmental bias show up in our lives. Black children have higher rates of asthma, and that's not biological or genetic. It's environmental. It's based on where they are growing up with poorer air quality. So I love to see when Black folks are building in climate.
Nice.
So in spaces where capital flows often, it typically follows privilege. How does the Black operator ventures disrupt that model?
Yeah, so I will say one of the things that we do that is really, really simple and easy, and I would challenge every investor to do, is you don't have to have a warm intro to connect with us. You can pitch us right on our website, and someone from our team looks at every single company that comes through and evaluates them. And so that's one way that we're disrupting, because we know that for the founders that we seek to invest in, they may not already be in our circles. They may not already know us, but that may not mean that they're not building what could be, industry defining, life changing companies. So that's one way that we look at it, that's really easy, where it's not about, your privilege. Another way that we do is we're really transparent and give people feedback, whether or not we make the investment. I just was on a call with someone earlier, and I was like, listen, I'm going to tell you the 3 things you did in our email interaction that let me know you don't know what you're doing, so that you can go fix those things, so that you can pitch someone else. Because somebody else is going to look at this and be like, oh, this person doesn't know what they're doing. Next, like, not even respond. But I saw what they were trying to build, thought it was really interesting, thought it deserved to be in the world. And like, a small thing like that shouldn't keep you. And many other folks get that tap on the shoulder, that little bit of feedback that helps them course correct. And so we're committed to giving people that feedback. And by and large, it's well received.
All right, excellent.
Recently, has there been any moments where like using an AI tool, you've been like kind of like blown away, like, wow, I didn't know we were there yet. Like we can do that yet. Is there one that comes to mind, or has there been one that's really scared you?
There haven't been ones that have really scared me. I will say the ones where I'm super impressed is where I see founders building AI to solve a problem or to do work that just would not have gotten done before. So something that would have been a manual process that 9 times out of 10 nobody would have done, and so someone's opportunities are constrained. Now there's AI against it. So an example I'll give is one from my own portfolio. It's a company called Advisorly. So they are a college transfer platform for community college students to enroll in 4-year degrees. And typically that process, there were a lot of stumbling blocks in between, because a lot of times if you wanted to look at 10 different schools that potentially transferring there, you had to manually check your transcript against all of those schools' requirements to be able to say, okay, I am qualified to go here, I have enough credits, that one I wouldn't have. And so Advisorly has built an AI, it's called Eddie AI, and within 99% accuracy, it can analyze a student's transcript, transcribe it against a school's requirements, and immediately say, hey, you're all good, you can apply. Actually, you need to take a few more courses, and these are the subject areas. And that was something that just wasn't happening. So that meant just a lot of community college students just weren't applying and weren't going to a 4-year school. So that's an example where I'm like, this is what AI can really do, is when we set it against a problem that is just remaining unsolved, and people are just saying, okay, I guess that doesn't work, or I guess we don't know. But it's like, actually, we can answer some of these questions and solve some of these problems.
Nice.
So, what advice would you give to your 25-year-old version of yourself trying to build something meaningful without access to capital?
The 25-year-old version of me, I would honestly say that the 25-year-old version of me did not realize how much of the world is built on other people's money, and how much of people's business success is built on being able to tap into other people's money, being things like venture capital, like being able to just take on an investor that's not someone that you don't just have to, save up. I don't come from a background that's, super into technology or entrepreneurship. Everyone in my family just had jobs, some good jobs, some, okay jobs, but everyone just had jobs. And a lot of the financial advice I got was just, save, don't live above your means, put some money to the side, because that is what worked for them. But that economy does not exist anymore. And so I would tell the 25-year-old version of myself, anything you're trying to build, find someone who also thinks that thing is amazing and use their money to build it.
Use somebody else's money. I love that. I think
Yep.
this is more of a fun, light question. What are your thoughts about the TV show Shark Tank? Do you think it gives a stigma to the world and the arena that you operate in, or do you think it actually highlights exactly what you're talking about? Go get other people's money to build things.
I used to watch Shark Tank when it kind of first came out. I haven't seen it in years. I will say that like anything, I think if you're going to do something, you should be incredibly strategic about it. So I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
shout out one of my college classmates. Her name is Melissa Butler. She is the founder of a cosmetics company called The Lip Bar. She went on Shark Tank probably
Oh
at this
yeah, I
point,
remember that. Mm-hmm.
probably about 10 years ago. And one of the judges, Mr. Wonderful, was not wonderful to her or her co founder. He was actually incredibly insulting. But what
Mm-hmm.
happened was the exposure from being on there and him being insulting actually woke up a whole customer base that was like, actually, no, I like exactly what she's building and
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to buy it. And she's still running a very successful cosmetic company now. So I include that example to show that, like, if you use it, if you're ready, it can be game changing for you, even if
Mm-hmm.
you don't get a deal. So I think if you have a consumer product, if you have a consumer product that you sell online and you're ready to be able to sell it when your episode airs, you should go on Shark Tank. If you have the kind of thing that millions of people could use, you should go on Shark Tank. If you're building B2B software, you probably don't need to go on Shark Tank. You probably won't even get picked, but you probably don't need to go on Shark Tank. So I think of anything, whether it's a TV show pitch competition, whether it's one in your community, whether it's, a corporate sponsored event, pitch competition or incubator, founders always have to be strategic about saying, what is this going to help me do for my company? Is this going to be worthwhile? Even if it doesn't go well, is the exposure that I would get from here, or the experience that I would get from here, still going to help me push my company forward?
Makes complete sense. Any other questions from you, Derv?
Um, I've got one. It's kind of doomer a bit. Um, to provide some context, just a little background on myself. Spent a few years with Tony at Meta, some years at Google, Microsoft AI as well. Um, I've got really strong opinions on what's going on in the AI space right now. Um, and I've noticed that. So here's the question. So like essentially, like if some of the most powerful AI models are now being built essentially behind closed doors by some of the same companies that also admit that the tech could be dangerous. But like they still keep their data, their design choices, like guardrails secret. Like how do we keep those like black box systems from essentially like amplifying like bias and widening the gap for marginalized communities? And like as an investor, like do you feel like kind of a level of responsibility to demand like real transparency and like outside oversight before you write the check? And I feel like I've kind of asked this question already, and you've kind of answered. So I apologize if it's repetitive. But does the like race for returns like make that almost like impossible to kind of balance that?
Yeah, I will say, I don't think the race for returns makes it impossible, because I think as an investor, every choice you make is a choice. There are companies that I look at that I'm like, I don't know that I think this thing needs to exist in the world. And so I can't infringe on your right to build it, but I don't have to be part of it. And I'm not going to, continue or put money behind it. I think the bigger thing that it seems like you're getting at is kind of who's going to be making the decisions for the AI, if it's going to affect so many of us, and how do we have any kind of like point of view on that, or have our voices heard on that? I do think a good number of those companies, and I haven't worked internally in them, but I've, known folks who have had roles of like, hey, here's how we can make the AI less biased. Here's how we can institute some guardrails against, the worst potential harms here. But ultimately, I think what it's going to come down to is, and this may sound funny, but I do think tech needs to take a page from the movie industry. So the PG-13, rated R, rated PG, that movies didn't start with ratings. Movies were just movies. And as there started to be, outcry and people saying, hey, wait a minute, I want to be able to bring my kid to a movie and not, necessarily show them something graphic that they shouldn't see. The leaders of the movie studios, which was only a few, honestly, similar as like the number of major tech companies we have, less than two handfuls, they got together and created their own system of rating and own system of, this is how we are going to determine what gets what rating. We still want to have the creative control to tell stories and tell stories in any kind of way. We don't want to be constrained to not ever have an R-rated movie, but we need to be able to create a system so that people know what they are choosing. And it's not a perfect one-to-one parallel, but I would like to see some, the I'll still call it the FANG companies, even though I know it's Meta now, but some of the companies that are building this AI and are building these that actually have the resources, have the talent, have the technical capability to, I know they're on competition with each other, but I do think there's a world where they need to come together to create the set of standards or framework for regulation themselves. Because what we don't want is any governmental body, whether that be the US or somewhere else, we don't want the government regulating the technology because government is just not well decided for it. Any law you pass on AI is going to be obsolete almost from the moment it goes into effect, because the technology will always outpace law and regulations. And so I think the best thing is for the folks who are closest to it to be able to say, hey, we're going to agree as an industry that this is where the guardrails are going to be, and this is how we're going to manage and mitigate some of those things. It's a little bit, optimistic because none of these companies have proven to play well with each other. But I
Very
do
true.
think it's going to come to a point where everyone's going to kind of have to get over themselves, or there will be the point where some governmental body says, if y'all don't do it, I will. And I promise it's going to be worse if we leave it to Congress or Parliament or whatever body to try to figure out, I mean, we've all seen the clips of like tech leaders go testify in front of Congress, and like folks who can't even figure out how to turn their phones on are asking about like how the software is built. Like, we don't want those people writing the bills.
That's funny.
Because a lot of those folks like are lobbied by those same corporations, major investors in those same corporations. I actually think, man, and I hope someone doesn't hear this and I get fired, but I actually don't think the fangs are best suited to like create the mechanism to like, I guess, formulate a rating system for industry run AI models, especially if closed source models are essentially the ones that win. Pretty much, I think they've become so large that at that point they can't put people over profits, and I don't think they want to, nor being very transparent about it. And I think in terms of like marginalized groups in particular, if open source doesn't win, we're kind of screwed. And that's not a question. I'm just thinking out loud. But I absolutely appreciate the insight.
Yeah. Yep. All right. But Dev, you want to wrap?
Yeah, absolutely. When you are locked in, like really focused, goal in mind, how do you block out the noise, so to speak? Especially with everything happening in the world, that I imagine, especially from a venture capital standpoint, sometimes you need to, when doing research, doing vetting, you kind of need to block out the noise a bit. Is there any methods that you do that kind of help you stay aligned, focused, undistracted? Any tidbits for our listeners?
Yeah, I will say, I mean, they're really kind of boring, but like, leave your phone in another room. If I'm really focused on one project and I can't even begin to count the number of tabs I have open right now, but I will open a brand new window that only has the tabs for that project so that I am not disturbed by email pings or, my goodness, the New York Times has a breaking news alert like 3 times a day. Like, those things just take away from my focus. So I will leave my phone in another room. Um, I'll or put my phone on do not disturb if I need it close to me. Um, Open up a new tab. I'm one old school trick. I go to the library. Our public libraries serve like such an important function in everyone's community. And I like to go and support them and patronize them because it is a library by nature. That means I'm not taking calls. I'm not talking to anybody. It puts me back almost in like student mode where I really focus on, okay, and now that I'm I'm here, I'm not at home, I don't have food, you can't lay out, you don't kick your feet up. So it really makes me focus on, I came here to achieve this goal, and I'm going to leave when this thing is done. And that 2 or 3 hours at the library becomes hyper productive. I think more broadly, in terms of blocking out the bigger noise, the kinds of things, not just the pings, but the things that can kind of keep you off of your mission, it's just really remembering why you set out to do the thing and making it really, really real. Like, I am doing this because I want to see this thing shift, or I want to see this thing come to life. I want to contribute to solving this problem, and reminding yourself of why you're doing it. Even the folks that I know who are the most money motivated, money alone is not enough. The money has to mean something else. So does the money mean freedom? Does the money mean kicking your feet up on the beach and never having to work again? Like, whatever it means to you, the accomplishment of the goal actually physically means, focus on that thing and remember that. I'm a little bit woo, so I'm going to take it there. But I also believe in, like, envisioning what that looks like. What will it feel like to achieve that goal? Like, if you are a founder and you want to ring the bell on the New York Stock Exchange, what are you going to wear? What side are you going to stand on? What hand are you, like, really make the thing real? Because if it just becomes an amorphous, oh, one day I will, then you won't. You have to make it really, really, really real.
I love
I like
those
that a lot.
tidbits, especially the pull up a brand new window and just have only those tabs up for your idea.
Yep.
But since we're talking about ideas, I have a great one for you. And I'll pitch you right now. How about you invest in Synonyms of Sound as your first podcast investment?
We don't invest in media properties. So I invest primarily in B2B software in industries where founders can build and grow without heavy regulation. So if you were to come up with a software for the podcast industry or the audio industry, then we could potentially talk. But I don't invest in any media properties.
All right, we'll come back to you. As you said, we got to iterate, so we'll iterate
We
again.
iterate and you pivot, you'll get there.
So tell us what's coming up for you. What's something that our audience should know that you're like working on, you got cooking up, like what exactly is happening in your world?
Yep. Awesome. So always investing in top Black founders at the seed stage through Black Ops VC. So if anyone is working on a company, a software company, and is interested in understanding VC, or thinks that like they would be a good fit for investment, like I mentioned earlier, you can pitch us right from our website. So you can go to Black Ops, that's BLACKOPS, VC as in venturecapital.com. And there is a link on our site. It will share with you how we invest, and there's a link to pitch right there. And then personally, I've had, as we've talked about, a bit of a varying career. So I'm a lawyer on paper. I went into the beauty industry. I've been a strategy consultant, a nonprofit executive, and now a VC investor. And I often hear folks asking me, how do you do that? How do you change industries? How do I switch lanes? I'm in this function, but I want to do something else. And so I've recently, started a pretty bespoke consulting practice around that, working with just a handful of clients. So I've called it the Antonia method because it's my method of how I've been able to change industries multiple times. So anyone who's interested there and thinking about changing roles, changing industries, and would like to work with me and help figure out what that strategy is going to be, you can reach out. The website is theantoniamethod.com, or email me at hello@theantoniamethod.com.
We love it. We love it. Thank you so much for being on this show. I feel like this is one of my favorites so far in regards to the gems and delivery and conversation we had. It was definitely a pleasure. And we really do appreciate you being a part of our journey.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me.